Have you ever purchased a flight and looked at all of the taxes and fees listed on the ticket? Or have you ever wondered why everyone in the industry describes airline profit margins as razor thin? Let's take a look at the costs associated with an airline getting you from point A to point B. You might actually be surprised how many there are. First off, we should note that this is a hugely complex area and something that changes a great deal between regions. Consider this a starting point to understanding this complex topic, rather than an exhaustive guide to running an airline. Let's look at the fixed costs faced by airlines. These are, of course, factored into airfares, but it's harder to attribute these to each flight. Firstly, the cost of owning or leasing an aircraft is obviously a major part of an airline's expenses, and depreciation adds to that complexity. Typical accounting measures suggest a depreciation cost of 4% per year. This would roughly assume a 25-year operating life for an aircraft. A carrier may not keep an aircraft this long, of course, but the remaining value is then reflected in the second-hand value. To put this in context, the list price for a new 777-8 aircraft is $410.2 million, so depreciation could be as much as $16.4 million per year. In reality, costs would likely be lower, as airlines usually expect a significant discount on the list price.
Over a long period of time, leasing is going to end up costing more. It's a bit like buying a car on finance. You end up paying more than it was worth. But with cars, at least you end up with a car. Leasing aircraft is essentially vanished money. But there are benefits to it as well. For a start, the cash flow benefits. There are no upfront payments to be made. Or certainly a lot less than buying an aircraft. And there's the ability to secure your aircraft really quickly. You don't have to wait in a long production queue to get your new plane. And it lets airlines get started with their operations with much less capital required.
And then there are maintenance costs. Aircraft undergo regular checks and maintenance as part of daily operations. On top of this, there's a system of heavier procedures called A, B, C, and D checks. This could be considered as either fixed or variable depending on flight activity. Like all fixed costs, there is an expense that needs to be attributed to each flight made. But to maintain an airworthy fleet, maintenance costs are inevitable.
Maintenance really is an unavoidable cost for any aircraft operator. We need to know that they're safe, efficient, and well maintained. As such, Boeing estimates that airlines around the world spend more than $40 billion every year maintaining aircraft. And these costs tend to increase dramatically with the age of the plane, and typically they make up about 10 to 20% of the direct operating costs. But you might think that when you're not flying a plane, these costs go away. However, that's not entirely true. During the pandemic, we saw hundreds of planes grounded for extended periods, but even these parked planes need regular attention, otherwise components start to degrade, and without the maintenance, airlines have to surrender their certificate of airworthiness.
Insurance is another major expense for airlines. Insuring aircraft will depend more on the fleet size than the number of flights.
Airlines always need to be prepared for unexpected costs. Flight delays, cancellations, often not their own fault, can trigger all sorts of expenses related to passenger rights. Things like overnight accommodation, getting people onto other airlines' planes to get them home, maybe providing meals, and here in Europe, compensation, which can run to thousands of dollars for a flight full of people. And a lot of these things are out of their control. It could be the weather or some other unusual circumstance, but they're always things that need to be budgeted for.
Reservation and booking costs are an interesting area, particularly for low-cost carriers, as many lower expenditures here by only selling flights through their own websites. Typically, though, airlines pay a percentage fee to booking agents and booking websites. Finally, for fixed costs, you have to pay staff and management. While there may be some flexibility to alter crew salary depending on schedules, there are also other salaries that are more fixed long-term. Think about your executives, accountants, network planning team, and so on. Whether or not your flights are full, these personnel need to be paid. Let's now look at the cost of operating each flight. These are the expenses airlines adjust according to their flight schedules. Some are directly related to each flight and would not be incurred if the flight did not operate, making them quite variable. Others are longer term based on the planned schedule, such as staff costs. According to Jean-Paul Rodriguez in the book The Geography of Transport Systems, staff and fuel costs are by far the largest expenses. Together, they account for 50% of all expenses, with staff at 32.3% and fuel at 17.7%. The number of cabin crew is dictated by strict regulations, with a minimum number for each aircraft type. This will be at least equal to the number of exit doors. Salaries, of course, can vary between airlines. According to salary tracking website Glassdoor, the average British Airways pilot salary is £87,000, and for EasyJet it's £50,184. Cabin crew likewise can earn different salaries depending on their contract terms or location base. Just look at the problems British Airways has had in 2020 trying to change its crew contracts. Crew bases and rotations are also a significant cost factor, especially with long-haul flights. Many airlines operate multiple crew bases to help with this. This not only affects cost, but provides local crew for better passenger service and provides backup in case of staff problems. For a good idea of what this costs in terms of operating a flight, we'll look at the FAA analysis numbers, which calculates the following per-hour operating costs for all crew. Wide body over 300 seats, $2,356. Wide body under 300 seats, $1,857. Narrow body over 160 seats, $1,152. Narrow body under 160 seats, $1,034. So, as a guide, our 7-hour 777 flight from London to New York would have a staff cost of around $16,500. Fuel is a major expense for airlines and is why they suffer so much in periods of high oil prices. For example, the fuel price more than doubled over 18 months up to September 2018. There are some strategies to deal with this. Many airlines will buy options for fuel ahead of time, locking in prices. This can make forward planning and accounting easier and provide some protection, but ultimately prices will rise when oil prices go up. The impact of rising prices is helped to some extent by more efficient aircraft as time goes on. This somewhat mitigates increases in flight activity. In 2019, Airlines for America quoted the average cost for fuel for a London to New York flight of $33,411. With normal winds, though, the return would use less fuel, costing $27,270. For comparison, a transcontinental flight from New York to Los Angeles would use $10,757 of fuel. The improvement in efficiency is best seen by comparing fuel burn per seat. An interesting study from the International Council on Clean Transportation looked at this for transatlantic operators. As well as highlighting which airlines have the best fuel economy, it also compared aircraft types. The industry average was 33 passenger kilometres per litre of fuel burn. The fuel-efficient Airbus A350 and Boeing 787 were significantly above this at over 40 passenger kilometres per litre. Landing fees are another airline expense. These are required to land at any airport and use the required facilities there. Fees vary a great deal between airports and take into account different factors including aircraft type and weight, landing time, and sometimes emissions and noise. Some locations split this into a fixed fee and a variable fee based on the load factor. The rates for JFK and other New York airports are published by the Port Authority of New York. In 2020, the fee was $6.95 per £1,000 of maximum gross weight. The maximum takeoff weight, or MTOW, of a 777-300ER is £775,000. This would make for a fee of $5,386. In addition to this, there are usage fees for airport parking areas, usually dependent on aircraft size and time on the ground. At JFK, these are $70 plus an additional $25 for each £25,000 MTOW over £200,000. This is charged for each period of up to 8 hours. For our hypothetical 777, this would be $645. As a comparison, rates for London Heathrow are based on aircraft size as well as noise category. For most heavy wide bodies, this would be £5,737 or $7,758 per landing. There is an additional emission charge of £16.84, or $22.80 per kilogram of nitrous oxide emission. For wide-body aircraft, Heathrow's parking charge after 90 minutes is £61.13 or $82.66 per 15 minutes. As well as landing fees, there are additional government taxes which vary hugely between countries and airports and change regularly. The UK has some of the highest such taxes with its Air Passenger Duty or APD on top of other taxes. Airlines will then pay overflight fees to any country they fly over during any given flight. This covers the use of air traffic control and other navigation services. For a flight just over the US or within Europe, which is centralised under Eurocontrol, this will be a single payment based on the aircraft type and length of the flight. The Federal Aviation Administration sets rates in the US. There are only two rates. Over land, the rate is $61.75 per 100 nautical miles, and over ocean, monitored by the FAA, the rate is $26.51 per 100 nautical miles. Europe's rates are more complicated and are based on aircraft weight, flight distance and a unit rate for each country. Considering the presence of overflight fees, changing routes even slightly can have a big effect on these costs. The Wall Street Journal found that a British Airways reroute of a Sao Paulo-London flight could save the airline around $4,000 just by switching to a more northerly oceanic crossing and entering the UK airspace over Cornwall rather than going over Portugal, Spain and France. If you're liking this video so far, why not click subscribe and hit the like button? Oh, and be sure to click that notification bell too. On top of airport fees, there are costs associated with using ground services. Have you ever noticed trucks with Swissport, Donata or Menzies logos roll up to an aircraft? These are third parties involved in turning around and serving an aircraft. The companies are hired by the airline for baggage handling, catering and more. Costs of such services are hard to obtain. Some discussion on blog airliners.net puts a standard ground turnaround charge for a 737 aircraft at $1,000 to $2,000. The above details have provided a guide to each of the main costs incurred. To bring them together, we'll look at the research into airline costs carried out by the FAA in 2018. This study attempted to quantify the total operating cost of various aircraft types. For wide-body aircraft over 300 seats, it estimated the total variable costs per block hour to be $9,097 and the total operating cost, including a proportion of airlines' fixed costs, to be $10,351. This would put the average large wide-body cost for a 7-hour flight across the Atlantic at just over $72,000. There will obviously be variation in this depending on aircraft type and exact routing, but it gives a good idea of how much airlines have to pay. A short-haul flight of 2.5 hours, for comparison, would reach almost $12,000 per hour.
When you take into account all the costs and liabilities involved in running an airline, it really is an expensive business. It just highlights how difficult it is to be competitive in today's environment. And with airlines offering historically low fares, most are flying on the thinnest of profit margins.
Did you know all of these costs and fees associated with air travel? Let us know in the comments. Did you know that we publish over 175 stories every single week on simpleflying.com? Be sure to check the link in the description for more great stories just like this. Thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe before you go.